Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. What's up, guys? Back with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute here at Spirits of French Lick today. This is one of my two doubling stills. This is a Nana. She's a hybrid 650-gallon pot with a 4-plate column. We don't actively run that column. I put that column on there because it gave me some more height, but therefore I have more natural reflux because the top of that still is going to take longer to heat up than the bottom, and it's going to force some natural reflux. We obviously get more in the wintertime than we do in the summertime, depending on the weather. But what I'm checking in for today will probably be a short video, and I don't do many of these from work, but I thought you guys might appreciate it. So you'll oftentimes hear me talk on the channel about how certain things in distillation don't scale correctly. One of the things that doesn't scale correctly is the amount of foreshots and the amount of heads and compounds that you may not want in your product compared to a small still. And there's multiple reasons for that. The biggest one is time spent under heat, therefore esterification, as well as heat breaking down some of the compounds that you don't want into other compounds that you might want. Not to mention the fact that you're going to make cuts a little bit differently when you are running a still for a brown spirit. So flip the camera around, show you the flow on the still right now, just because I think you guys might appreciate it. So there we are coming off the parrot. We just cut from heads into hearts. And what I wanted to talk to you about is the following. So typically on these stills, we do 1,200 gallon fermentations. We do a stripping run on a 1,200 gallon stripping still out in the other room. We collect that, that's all going to be about 60 to 70 proof in general. Put that back into either this girl or this one over here, and then rerun it. Now, I know a lot of you are familiar with the formula for figuring out how much foreshots, how much methanol they should be at the beginning of your run. You'll see formulas anywhere from 35 mils to 50 mils per gallon of foreshots based on how many gallons of actual mash that you have. And then that's not even counting your heads. So put that in perspective for you for what we have here. 4 shots alone based on that formula, turn the camera back around. 4 shots alone based on that formula would be about 14 gallons. That's a lot of 4 shots. That's not even counting your heads. Because these stills are bigger, because there's more copper contact, because it's more time spent under heat, because we have that high column that gives us some more natural rectification capabilities, gives us higher proof and purity, and cleans up our spirit quite a bit. What we actually end up with here, you have to ignore the pump, industrial setting, right? What we actually end up with here is about 2 gallons of 4 shots. Now, heads really depends on a lot of things. It depends on your fermentation temperature, type of yeast you're using, the compounds you're after, etc. Mostly acetaldehyde, ethyl acetate, and heads as far as whiskey goes. The acetaldehyde we don't want at all. The ethyl acetate, if we're going into a barrel, it has a little bit of an earthy flavor, and when you smell it, the aroma of that particular compound has a little bit of that grain note to it, but it has a real nice earthiness to it as well. We want the very end of that compound to actually go into the hearts for our whiskey that's going to go into a 53-gallon barrel. And so we cut that in. Now, depending on the yeast, whether or not it's a high acetaldehyde producer, and SO2 and H2S both stick to acetaldehyde. So high acetaldehyde producer means more sulfates, means dirtier stills, means a bigger heads cut. When we're using those particular kinds of yeast, we do get about 10 to 14 gallons of heads off of the low wines going in here, probably about 350 gallon run of low wines. When we switch over to a low acetaldehyde producer, therefore a low SO2 H2S producer, we end up with closer to 7 gallons of heads, which doesn't sound like much from a 1,200 gallon fermentation. But again, things don't scale correctly. This still is a whole lot different than running a 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 gallon still. They don't scale the same way at all, scientifically. Understand that if we were to take the type of 4 shots cut that they talk about taking with that formula from 35 mils up to 50 mils, you'd have, again, 14 gallons of 4 shots, not counting your heads. If you then took heads, which I can tell you that after taking 2 gallons of 4 shots here and 7 gallons of heads off of this using the yeast we're using, we're clean. If you were then to take a heads cut based upon those formulations that you'll see on the internet, you're going to end up with 20, 30 gallons of heads, if not more. Doesn't work that way. not on these large stills. And I thought that was something that you guys might appreciate, and you might want to have a better understanding of if you've never been around commercial pot still distilling. If the numbers don't sound right, it's because it's not the same. The same as if you use something spicy in a botanical spirit, like grains of paradise or black pepper. In a small run, it might be 0.05 grams per gallon. If you try to scale up 0.05 grams per gallon to one of these stills, you're going to way overshoot. If you got black pepper in there, all you're going to have is black pepper in there, I guarantee it. The trick is to get your product from a small scale up to a large scale. It's like playing darts, right? Sometimes at a good enough distance, if you're even on the dartboard, you're doing pretty damn good, and you make your adjustments from there. Excuse me. A couple other things that I thought I'd share with you guys. So when I'm in here making my cuts, we don't use any automation for cuts whatsoever. It's all done manually the old-fashioned way. And one of the tricks that we use is that you need to be able to ground yourself. In other words, you need to be able to be familiar with your environment and the smell of yourself, what you're used to smelling on a daily basis, right? You need to be, a lot of people tell you stay away from spicy foods. They'll tell you stay away from coffee. They'll tell you stay away from tannic stuff and all that stuff. If that's what you're used to, continue with your normal procedures as you would every day. All right, if you drink coffee in the morning, you smoke cigarettes, drink coffee and smoke cigarettes, because if you don't, your palate's going to be way off. I'm not encouraging smoking. I'm just telling you that some of these people are a little full of shit sometimes. But the way that you ground yourself, smell the inside of your elbow. You're most familiar with the smell of yourself every day, and so that's going to ground you and give you a basis to be able to make better cuts. When we make cuts on this style system, I'll flip this camera around and show you what I do. Generally, I won't be able to do all of it because it requires two hands. So here's our product output. We can open that up. I catch a little on my hand. I'm doing two things here. I'm seeing what I'm feeling as far as where's the alcohol content. Is it dry? That means it's higher proof, right? Probably 158 or so right now. I then take my hands and I'll rub them together to create friction. And then I'll smell my hands. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're heating up that alcohol. You're vaporizing some of the volatility of the ethanol so you can get past the ethanol, and then you smell your hand. When you smell your hand at that point, as I'm doing now, retronasally, you get a better idea of what's actually happening within that cut. So what we're getting here at about 158 proof, we know that's high proof because we can feel how fast it dries on our skin. There's no oiliness to it or anything. I can smell just a little bit of that ethyl acetate, a little bit of that earthiness, and then that grain is moving to the forefront, along with those fruity aromas that we're after here at Spirits of French Lick in particular. So I know I'm full on into my hearts. Now, a lot of people will ask about plastic in distilleries. It is my preference to use glass, copper, etc. I don't store spirits for drinking in plastic for any amount of time. I don't mind to catch my heads in a plastic bucket. We do rerun heads on our whiskey. We'll rerun those heads up to 5 times in the next stripping run of the same product to rectify it, because it breaks down acetaldehyde and ethyl acetate and methanol. Heat cycling breaks that stuff down. It does not build up over time. I don't care who tells you it does not. When they've distilled 5,000 or 6,000 barrels of double pot distilled spirits, then I'll listen to them. Until then, it doesn't build up. But what does happen is we do start to get some off compounds, so after the 5th run, we don't put it back in. We never put our heads back into our brandy whatsoever, because I want that brandy as clean as what I can get it, really. But I do catch the heads with a plastic food grade bucket. Those are the heads from this morning, about 7 gallons roughly, is what we got off of a 1,200 gallon fermentation. Now there is plastic over here. This is also a food grade ethanol resistant. It's actually a silicone is what it is. If I had my preferences and I owned anything, which I don't, that'd be stainless steel, which I do have on some of the other systems here. But it's only touching that stuff for just a couple seconds on its way into the tote. You can see how fast it's flying now. I'll show you. Speed of distillation is also very important. On these stills, we have agitators on the inside of them. And depending on what we're running, we'll run faster, we'll run slower, just depending on what we're running. That agitation in there, moving that liquid around, depending on how fast that agitator is moving, that will actually help determine the rate of distillation that we are getting. Not only the amount of steam going into the steam jackets on the still, as you can see we've got steam jackets, but the actual amount of agitation. I'll step up here and see if you can see the agitator on the inside. But depending on how fast that agitator is running, that'll help determine how fast the still runs. That agitator runs slower, you get a slower distillation. Faster is a faster distillation. Today we're about 3/4 of the speed of full speed. If we were doing rye whiskey or high rye whiskey or high rye bourbon, I'd probably be running that thing 100% all out. If we're running apple brandy, I'll cut it back some. So, hey guys, I thought you'd find that video interesting, and like I said, I very rarely do these at work, but I thought that this was something that might inform you about scaling up if you ever look at going into a legal distillery and doing some distilling, understanding that things don't work the same on scale. So, all right, love y'all. Later.